Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Yes? Well, thank you for being here. This is the last session of the day, and we had already quite a lot of discussions, but we will keep this, I think, very interesting as well. And yesterday, when we started, during the dinner speeches, Anna Dobre, who is here, said that cohesion policy is a policy in dire need of new ideas. And the spirit of today's session is exactly this, to bring new ideas. And the best way to bring new ideas is actually to involve people, younger researchers who come to cohesion policy with fresh eyes and with fresh minds. And that's why we're very delighted here to have 6 bright newcomers to the field, early career scholars who will be presenting their innovative work. So there will be 6. We will not have too much time, but we will keep it dynamic, as Alessandro will explain. My name is Laura Polverari. I come from the University of Padua, and I will be co-moderating together with Alessandro Rainoldi, who many of you already know, who is, of course, head of unit for territorial development at the JRC in Seville for the European Commission. So we will start in this order. So the first one to illustrate his research is Fabien Gall, who is both a civil servant in the region of Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes in France, but also he's doing his PhD for another region in France at the University of Rennes. And then he will talk about cohesion policy and the barriers to access to funding from cohesion policy. And then we will have Dima Yankova, if I pronounced it well, who is a PhD candidate as well at Ingenio, which is a joint research center funded by the Spanish National Research Council and the University Politécnica de Valencia. And she will talk about smart specialization and knowledge recombination and the role of networks, basically. And then we have Kira Gatsu Katsuyanni, who is a postdoc from the London School of Economics, and she will illustrate a very interesting research project which she has already completed, I think, by and large, on basically how EU cohesion policy and agricultural policy facilitate local cooperative activities in contexts that per se would not be so favorable for cooperation.
And then we'll have Rami Shamsin talking about the green, social and thematic bonds, solution to local authorities funding gap from the University of Greenwich. Then Ruggero Cefalo, PhD at Urbino University and postdoc at the University of Vienna, talking about the labor market, so for the youth, and the integration of labor market in the European regions, opportunity and challenges for cohesion. And finally, oh my God,
sorry.
How can you? That's my technology.
No, that's okay.
Technological literacy or illiteracy. Then finally, Milad Abbasi Harofte, assistant professor at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands, who will present, will talk about greening at the periphery, an analysis of geography, technology, and markets across EU regions. And without further ado, I just would like to let you know that you will have 7 minutes for your presentations, and we'll set aside a few minutes, let's say up to 5 minutes, immediately following each of the presentations for interaction with the audience. This should allow us to have a further debate at the end of the session. So my only plea for you is to try to be sharp on your presentations, clear on the key messages, and also on maybe the points, the issues that you wish to share with the audience and where you would like to get feedback from the audience. So I will immediately let the floor to Fabien Gall. And okay, Fabien, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, and thanks for the introductions. That helps me save 1 minute since time is short, so I can immediately jump into the content of my presentation. So the main question, research question of my work is who has access to EU cohesion policy funding and how? Now I'm still kind of at the start of my PhD project, so I don't have the answer to the question yet, but I will try to make a point why this question is worth asking and why it is important to consider it. So first of all, or the straightforward answer to the question why it is important is because there's a problem of access. We've heard this morning the delays of implementation, that there's absorption pressures, and it is difficult to implement, and there's also evidence that in some programs at least, it's always the same beneficiaries who are reoccurring, who are reapplying for funding, and some managing authorities, like the managing authority I come from, struggle to incite new project promoters to make an application to cohesion policy. At the same time, we've also heard it several times today, there's the argument of complexity. It's too complex to implement cohesion policy. So it seems to be logical to conclude that the complexity is the reason for the problems that we're seeing in access. Looking at rational actor models, that seems quite logical because if you consider cost-benefit analysis, the more administrative tasks there are, the more you need to respond, to understand complexity, fulfill requirements, the less interesting it gets for you to apply to funding. So naturally, policymakers have put significant effort into simplification. There's simplified cost options, there's other measures that try to make the implementation of cohesion policy more easy and thus reduce complexity. But it seems, at least at this stage, that the problems of access continue. We still have implementation delays increasing from programming period to programming period, and also recurrent beneficiaries still seem to continue. So we can ask ourselves, are the simplification efforts non-effective, or are there maybe other factors explaining access? And this is exactly my starting point. So I define the access as having two dimensions. So on the one hand, there is the public policy, and there's quite a lot of work being done on public policy, on the design of public policy, on the instruments, how we choose the instruments. And I won't go into detail of this discussion, but the important element to take away from it is that there is a targeting of the public policy, because in times of limited resources, we need to make sure that we reach the project promoters which are in a position to fulfill the objectives of the policy the best way. So that's the traditional approach. But in my view, there's another dimension, and that's the reception by the target audience. So we cannot assume that if we put policy instruments in place, the beneficiaries will automatically apply for funding. So my argument is that we need to take into account the role of or the behavior and the characteristics of project promoters in applying to funding. Yeah, I think for time I'll skip this. Surprisingly, I did not find work that looks at this beneficiary focus in cohesion policy literature or in territorial policy literature overall. I find this surprising because if you look at other policy areas, there are quite some studies that look at the implementation of public policies that go beyond the maybe rational actor model explanations of access, and they advance other explanatory factors of the access to a public policy. So I think it is needed to include that beneficiary focus into the analysis of how cohesion policy works. How to do it? taking a beneficiary perspective, there are 3 preconditions for access. The first is a potential beneficiary needs to be aware of the funding opportunities. Once aware, there also needs to be willingness and motivation to make the application and to request funding. And finally, there is a capacity issue, the ability to establish a project, make the application, meet the requirements, and get the funding approved. I've looked at the different literature, and by analogy, I came up with some theoretical and explanatory factors, which I've structured around these 3 preconditions from my previous slide. Those theoretical factors include like the inclusion into policy networks. If you have a network, you're more likely to be aware of funding opportunities. Communication is an important explanatory factor, as it is a precondition for awareness. You need to find out about the funding opportunities, but it also has an impact on the perception of structural funds. So if you only hear about cohesion policy being complex, you might not be willing to make the application. There's also identity. Do you identify with the European project? Do you want to contribute to European objectives? Local identity is also important. Do you want to contribute to local development? And then in terms of the ability, there's the internal organization of a potential beneficiary. Do you maybe rely on external support? Do you dedicate special staff? So all these questions are important and are worth exploring further. Just role of the MA's administrator, so there's also another factor. And given that cohesion policy is quite broad in scope, I expect there's variation across the thematic intervention area and the type of beneficiary. I see time has run up, just one word. So the next step is obviously to put this theoretical model into testing. In a case study of the Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes region, applying a mixed methodology, and I hope to be ready with then the answer of my initial questions, who has access and how, for the 4th Joint Cohesion Policy Conference. I'm not sure when that is, but I'll be ready, I promise. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Fabian, not only because you broke the ice with your first presentation, but also because the people in the audience cannot see he had a timer. So he could see the seconds pass, and it's really, really tough, actually, to do a presentation and watching constantly the time. So, I don't know, of course, they have to learn. We have to learn. So are there any questions? One question to start with for Fabian from the floor. No? Maybe I'll... Yes, please then, Anna.
And Vasilis.
Oh, or Vasilis, whoever. Ladies first, Anna.
Thank you. So I'm Anna Maria Dobro from the European Commission. What would be interesting, Fabian, is from where you have started with the 2, like with investigating whether the starting point, for the access and how and why, then to, I would guess, to pass in a second stage to how to link it better, like with the conditions at the policy level, So it's beneficiary on one side, and then the rules and the environment of the policy on the other side. And that I did not see much in the presentation. Of course, it's 7 minutes. But I think that in order to have the 2 sizes, I would say, and to have a more fully fledged approach to understanding the process per se, and to introduce the focus of beneficiary into that, is indeed to also look from the perspective of the policy, the conditions, the preconditions, and also the capacity as well. So you'd have all these elements that without them, the focus of beneficiary would only be, would would be interesting to fill in the gap in research, but it would not tell the whole story, I think. Yeah. So that was less of a question, but it was more of a, like how to get to the next step, how to link it further with the policy and with the needs of research that we currently have. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. And Vasilis, and then you can maybe reflect. Yeah. Vasilis Monasteriotis.
Yeah. So also a very quick comment in this, well, in a different direction, but in the same spirit, that I didn't see a lot about in the very few minutes of presentation about the material constraints, like access to finance, size of potential applicants. And of course, that depends also on so it reflects the composition of the region. So I would recommend, if I may, that when you design the questionnaire, you go to do the participant observation and process tracing, you need to think about other things. So I can think about financial constraints and financial capacity, but also some sort of network. Many of the projects, you have to combine actors together, and if your region is not good enough in combining actors together, then that's a deterrent. So if you focus too much on the individual potential beneficiary, you may miss out on environmental factors that may play a role.
Thank you. Are there any more comments? Yeah, I will add one comment. I think in developing the research sort of a framework to start with, you might want to think of a research hypothesis to guide your empirical analysis, insofar as thinking based on what was just said, so the characteristics of the beneficiaries and the characteristics of the policy, your expectations based on what you find in the literature as to which kind of beneficiaries might find, more barriers to access cohesion policy funding. Mm-hmm. So I think, I don't know if Alessandro has some comments or...
Well, not really. I think that this discussion, even if it's very, very quick, I would say supports the idea, in my view, that if you want to invest in capacities at the local level, at the regional level, you don't necessarily need to invest only in government capacity, but also in the capacity of the overall community to actually respond to the policy solicitations that come from the government. So a bit kind of broaden the scope of the actions in terms of capacity building. That's just a comment.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
If you want
Please.
to just react.
You would like to react?
Yeah, to all questions I have.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks a lot for all the feedback. I mean, the policy side, of course, it's very important. The way I try to address this is the policy side, I see it as a given, as a context, which I will have a chapter on, which I've actually already started drafting. Then I see also the link to the policy as the policy implications that will come out of my research. So looking at the potential beneficiaries and how they react will hopefully also give me insight on what specific element of the policy design is creating a problem at the level of the beneficiary. So the idea is really to take the lens from the bottom up to look at the policy rather than look at the policy instruments and look at the impact the policy instrument is having. My idea is to look from bottom up the potential beneficiary and then have the implications on the policy itself. I think stop here. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Fabian. And now we move immediately to Dima Yankova, who will be talking about a Hamletic or Hamlet-style question, to link or not to link, and exploring the drivers of tie formation in regional knowledge networks. So Dima, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I was just thinking that my presentation actually aligns very well with the previous one because I'm going to talk about network between actors. More specifically, like regional R&D networks. We know that they're important for a number of reasons. Among them, knowledge sharing, knowledge exchange. They also facilitate pooling of resources, distribution of costs. They can also lead to technological convergence between different regional industries. And I think policy prescriptions are increasingly reflecting this. I've taken just an excerpt from a handbook on implementing smart specialization, which states that regions must strengthen their internal networks, creating triple helix or quadruple helix relationships between different knowledge-generating actors. And knowledge-generating actors here refers not only to universities and research centers, but also companies, civil society organizations, government bodies, and so on. So while there is this shared understanding that strengthening R&D networks is important, I think there's still some open questions regarding the nature of these networks, how they emerge, how they evolve over time, and what are some of the mechanisms that drive tie formation. Of course, these questions are not new, and there's quite a lot of literature on the issue, and even though it's very difficult to summarize in just one slide, I would mention two of the most common drivers of tie formation. One of them is past partnership. So when two organizations have already partnered in the past, there is a sense of trust that is built over time and makes it more likely for these two organizations to continue that collaboration in the future and repeatedly partner again. The second factor is more of a network level element. It's called triadic closure, and it refers to a situation where two organizations, in this case A and B, are more likely to partner with each other if they have a third partner in common. And that third-party reference can serve as a good sort of source of information about the reliability of the two actors, what type of information, knowledge, or resources they may provide. So in order to explore these questions, I look at a particular region. My empirical analysis is focused only on the region of Valencia in Spain. And I gathered data about publicly funded regional collaborative R&D projects for the period 2016 to 2022. I looked at two funding organizations in particular, AVI and IVASE. The only thing you need to know about these two organizations is that collectively they manage 75% of the funding that the Valencian government designated for the implementation of smart specialization. So our reasoning was, if I'm a company or a research center and I have a project in mind, I'm quite likely to apply to one of these two organizations. Because we combine different types of open calls, we also wanted to make sure that the typology of the projects is similar. So we only look at projects that concern industrial research or experimental development. So these are more of an innovation, there's an innovation focus in these projects. The pool of beneficiaries is quite wide, so it's not limited only to companies or research centers or universities. And I think the most important feature of the data set is that we included both approved and rejected projects. We managed to get our hands on data on rejected projects as well. The only thing I would highlight briefly from this slide is the number or the share of approved projects. So there was a very nice split in the data. So about half of the projects received the funding they applied for, the other half were rejected. So once we collected the data in the 7-year period, our first task was to map it and see, well, during these 7 periods of funding, what kind of network did these partnerships end up creating? And we see on the left-hand side, this is a map of the Valencian region. It is highly concentrated along the 3 main industrial centers, and that kind of made us question also to what extent are we really capturing a regional knowledge network. But there is, of course, some participation from more rural municipalities. On the right-hand side, you see the same map, but it is mapped aspatially. And you can see that it's highly centralized. This is not unusual or surprising. Other case studies in different regions also show that usually there are a couple of actors that are very central in the network, and they serve as a glue that holds the network together. Otherwise, it would be a lot more fragmented. And these tend to be universities or research centers. So that's why I've marked them in a different color, so you could hopefully see them more clearly. The next step was to actually test whether the two mechanisms that are commonly cited in the literature are in operation in the case of Valencia, and we found positive and significant coefficients both for path partnership and for triadic closure. But as I said, because we had information on rejected projects as well, what we wanted to see is whether not having received the funding actually changed the collaborative behavior of entities or the way they select partners. And what we found is that actually it doesn't. So even in cases when organizations did not receive the funding that they applied for, they're still more likely to choose each other as partners in the subsequent period. The same is also true for triadic closure. So when that third-party reference is an organization with which either A or B failed to obtain funding, so they applied together but did not receive funding for that project, still that third-party reference seems to be a strong predictor for future collaboration. So that leads me to a few key takeaway points On the one hand, because failed partnership turned out to be an equally strong predictor of future collaboration, I think it's important to think about including that as a factor when we try to either predict or map how a network might behave in the future. But more importantly, I think the fact that repeated collaboration was such a strong factor might also be raising some concerns about the danger of over-embeddedness, and this is something that other researchers have also pointed to. So when two organizations are repeatedly choosing each other as collaborators, it is worth asking the question, at least I think in the case of Valencia, to what extent did these 7 years of policy implementation end up creating new links between organizations that were not familiar with each other before, or was it simply reinforcing an already existing network and making the connections even stronger? And of course, there is nothing inherently bad with either one of these approaches, but I think, at least in the region that I looked at, there was a misalignment between what was set out to be achieved and what was actually achieved. I think there was a lot more reinforcement of a network that was already in place and a lot of repeated collaborations between partners that were already familiar with each other and had already worked together before, as opposed to expanding the network and bringing in new actors in order to diversify or to branch out or to combine perhaps different sources of knowledge, different industries, and so on. So there's only 10 seconds left, so I will leave it at that, and yeah, happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Dima. Any questions from the audience or comment? Yes, please, Sally.
Hello, Sally Hardy from Regional Studies Association. As somebody that tries to build networks, I know how difficult it is to get people to talk to each other at a personal level, never mind at an institutional level. So do you think that the EU institutions should be doing more to force institutions to reach out and find new partners? Slightly twisting what you've said round.
Thank you, Sally. Any other question or comment? Yes, Laura, please.
Laura De Dominicis from the DG Regio. I have a question if you had any qualitative information on which type of network were created by the repeated or the triadic, whether it was like a university, private, or I don't know, I think you have qualifiers up to the quadruple helix, and if those like repeated have qualitative characteristics.
Okay, any other question or comment? No, maybe I can try to make a couple of comments. I mean, the point you raise, the points you raise are very interesting, especially for someone like me who has been extensively involved in the issue of regional innovation strategies and regional innovation ecosystems. And maybe I would just like to make a comment on some kind of further steps that are just my thoughts. One is about the role of certain institutions or organizations inside the collaboration networks. I think your data show that I think some universities or research centers are kind of orchestrators of networks. And maybe a step forward would be to understand what does that mean in particular. So what makes an organization an orchestrator of an innovation network or a network of a collaboration network? And the second one is about your I think last slide, or the point of the development of alliances between key orchestrators or key organizations. So in that way, I see the issue of maybe incumbents allying amongst themselves and build a network of incumbents, therefore protecting themselves against entry of different of competitors. And of course, that is an issue, and I think on my side, it's a problem of trying to disentangle this relation and trying to break the barriers that this alliance between incumbents might generate. So this is a comment. Laura, would you like to?
No, I'm not going to add anything. I just, we have 1 minute for reactions, and then we pass on to the next. No, thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting questions and comments. Okay, I'll try to address them quickly, one by one. Should we do more? Yes, but at least my observations in this case is that while in the case of Valencia there was a lot of funding designated for collaborative projects, of course there were quite a lot for the individual beneficiaries, but it seemed that the region was investing in building this network. The problem was in the specifications they were setting in these open calls, which made it so easy for incumbents to actually reinforce partnerships that they had already been engaging in for quite a long time. So I would say that, yes, we have to invest more, but we also have to put out some restrictions in the open calls themselves that make it perhaps a bit harder for that repetition to actually occur. Around the role of I assume that you mean the institution or the organizational background of the organizations. We have that data, and what was interesting, even though we haven't completely exploited that, but what I found interesting is that even though neither of the open calls actually explicitly required the presence of a university or a research center in the consortium, that still produced a very centralized network around these main actors who were consistent collaborators. So, yeah, even in cases when it's not a requirement and there are projects which actually were entirely between companies, there was no public research institution present, but many of the triads and the consortium that we observed within the network have at least one organization that is a public research organization. Yeah, I think that's more or less what I noted down. So
thank you very much. Yeah, the last points were suggestions, so you can reflect in your own time. And we'll pass the floor now to Kira Garzu-Katsuyanni to present her research. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. My name is Kira Garzu-Katsuyanni. I'm a political economist, and I'm doing currently my postdoc at the LSE's European Institute. And today I'll present a few findings from my PhD project entitled Cooperation Against the Odds. So as you see, there's very good kind of thematic coherence in the panel so far. So as we have already heard, and I would like to reinforce, local cooperation is a key ingredient for fostering territorially inclusive growth. I'm talking about the slightly different types of cooperation. So I'm talking about inter-firm cooperation and how it can help small firms acquire capabilities collectively that they would not otherwise have individually, for example, for quality upgrading or branding. Also, I'm talking about kind of cooperation in remote declining areas to help generate new types of economic activity, such as alternative tourism. So kind of these are some of the types of outcomes that can be associated with local cooperation, and which is why cooperation among local stakeholders is considered such an important part of place-based policies. Nevertheless, we know relatively little about how to foster such cooperation, especially in settings with low trust and weak institutions, where it is the hardest to get. And this is the topic of my PhD. I address it drawing on 8 case studies within Greece, which is generally considered to be an unfavorable general context for cooperation. So in my thesis, I develop a framework, a theoretical framework that can help us understand how macro-level policies, both domestically and at the EU level, can help reduce the obstacles to local cooperation. And in this framework, I build on Elinor Ostrom's book, Governing the Commons. And like Ostrom, I recognize that public authorities cannot impose local cooperation from above. Local leadership is always necessary to trigger cooperation in adverse circumstances. So it is local leaders who will gradually introduce cooperative norms and identify solutions to collective action problems that stakeholders face. But macro-level policies can do a lot to facilitate the work of those leaders, and they can do that in 5 ways. Firstly, they can encourage the adoption of locally applicable rules that help address the concrete collective action problems that local stakeholders are facing. Secondly, they can empower local communities to define their own plans and rules rather than imposing them from above. Thirdly, and very important for low-trust settings, they can help ensure that local rules are actually enforced. Fourthly, they can subsidize the upfront costs of cooperation, which are often very high. And finally, they can discourage opportunistic behavior by new entrants in the local market. And I call macro-level policies that satisfy those 5 characteristics facilitative overarching institutional frameworks. I would now like to give you an example that is surprising of a policy that actually satisfies those 5 characteristics. This is geographical indications in the wine sector. That's geographical indications fall in the scope of agricultural policy, and they are labels granted to products with specific characteristics that are linked to their geographical origin. I mean, I call it a surprising example because geographical indications are maybe the last institution that would have come to my mind when I was thinking about local cooperation a few years ago. But I think it's an important example because we observe an exceptional number of high cooperation cases in the Greek wine sector, so much more so than in other sectors. And I think one of the reasons for that is because the EU system of protected designations of origin, so the PDO system, is actually so effective at fostering local cooperation. So how does it do that? Briefly, it creates strong incentives for adopting local rules about quality, as a product needs to have very specific production rules to be eligible for a PDO label, and this helps to solve collective action problems that usually inhibit quality upgrading in other sectors, for instance. So I have in the slide a quote from the president of Santorini's wine cooperative. Santorini is one of the most successful wine-producing areas of Greece. So he says, getting a PDO was important for us because it requires that you're organized, that you have all those elements that we were lacking until then. So the creation of institutions, services, rules. Those rules are not imposed from above, they're created by the group applying for PDO status. Thirdly, the EU requires member states to set up dedicated administrative structures and multiple layers of controls to ensure that the local rules are followed, which makes a huge difference in terms of the credibility of the quality upgrading effort because it reduces cheating. Fourthly, as one of my interviewees in the wine sector said, the EU always, and especially as time goes by, prioritizes team projects when it comes to funding. And then finally, the agricultural legislation makes it very difficult for a new winemaker to enter the local market and benefit from the good reputation that has been created while cheating on the quality rules. And this is also considered very important on the ground. So what about cohesion policy? Cohesion policy has often been very successful at subsidizing the upfront cost of cooperation. One of my other case studies is a remote mountainous Greek village that revived against all odds through alternative tourism, and cohesion policy funding through multiple programs was very central to that result. Community-led local development programs, such as the LEADER program, have also created important opportunities for local stakeholders to formulate joint plans, although these are very specific programs, and actually LEADER was part of agricultural policy in the last programming period. So I'm wondering if, thinking creatively, can cohesion policy adopt some more of the characteristics of a facilitative overarching institutional framework and become even more effective at fostering local cooperation? For example, could more cohesion policy programs take into account the effect of macro-level policy design on local cooperation, particularly when they are addressed to regions with many small firms, where that type of cooperation is important? And secondly, for the community-led programs, could we strengthen the requirements for defining locally agreed plans and rules to avoid situations of funding individual projects that end up not working so well together? Thirdly, could enforcement focus not just on how transparently the funds are spent, but also on how local beneficiaries honor their local cooperation commitments? And then finally, can we leverage potential synergies between cohesion policy and domestic or other EU policies in order to promote local cooperation more successfully in the end? So for instance, could regional authorities be encouraged to make proposals about what domestic macro-level institutions would also need to change in order to promote local cooperation in the region more effectively? So thank you very much for listening. And if you're interested in learning more about how local leadership and macro-level policies can help foster local cooperation in adverse circumstances, there was a policy paper that came out last week, so you can have a look at that. Thanks.
Thank you, Kira. Of course, the presentation would have been better if you had brought some of the wine for us to taste. Jokes aside, can we have one comment? We need to speed up a little bit, but I think there should be some, feedback. Please, Anna.
Yeah, quickly. And again, as you can see, my mind frame is set on the next steps, on the future, and how you can use that for the what you can use getting out of your PhD and then postdoc in order to for the next step. I think that what would be interesting in order to get closer and more concrete recommendations when it comes to the policy is it would be interesting to have a look at the specific instruments that are part of the policy, like the territorial instruments that have been introduced, and you could have integrated territorial instruments. You could have a look at the community-led development projects. You could have a look even at the latest, because these are really micro projects under the Just Transition Fund. So I think that these type of examples are going to get you closer to what the policy does, and then from what you have studied, draw further conclusions of how to, what other things, because that's ultimately, that's the bottom line research question. What else can cohesion policy do? Because we're doing lots of things, but there are still limitations on the ground. There are still, things that are, how the innovative part of it would be indeed to link what you have done with what the policy is proposing, and to see what else can actually be done on top, just to, for the policy for the future to actually be more effective when it comes to local cooperation and integrating the bottom-up approach. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from the floor? Okay, so this was more of a suggestion. I don't know if you want to react to that or.
Thank you. It's a helpful point. Yes.
Do you want to introduce the next?
Yeah, well, I think just a comment on that. It's again about how much a policy should or can be prescriptive vis-a-vis what happens on the ground, and I don't have an answer to that. So I think this is something that deserves to be further analyzed in the broader issue of smart specialization strategies, for example, where the Commission was prescriptive enough. I think there have been examples of success. That prescription or the prescriptive approach helped and worked, and other examples where it actually didn't. So I think that indeed this is a topic that deserves further research, further attention, and that would be beneficial, as Anna says, for the future steps to be taken. Sorry to take this. I just go immediately to Rami Shamsin, who will be talking about thematic. Green social and thematic bonds.
Absolutely.
Please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to present part of my PhD research that I've done at the University of Sheffield at the Department of Urban Studies and Planning, and I currently work for the University of Greenwich. So the research is mainly about how capable are local and regional authorities, and mostly to the extent of other sub-sovereign authorities, to enable them to fund their infrastructure projects independent from any financial support. And here comes the review. And in England specifically, the post-2010, where a comprehensive spending review resulted in more reductions in central government support for subnational authorities, and they had to reduce significantly their grants directed to any sub-sovereign entity. And at the same time, post the global financial crisis, there was pressure to promote more growth while at the same time, grants and subsidies are being reduced, simultaneously where demand for more social services have been growing ever. With the drop in funding and with the lack of income sources accessible by local and regional authorities, banks as well, post the global financial crisis, they were not so happy in being exposed to long-term funding and financing to local authorities, and therefore they had to look for more innovative sources to fund their infrastructure projects. And here comes municipal bonds. In its definition, a municipal bond is a kind of debt instrument issued by subnational authorities to fund specific projects such as building a road or a hospital and paying back the interest and the debt over a certain period of time. Now, how municipal bonds are being perceived by investors? They are perceived as a safe and low income, low risk instrument, because at the end of the day, they are lending a well-known subnational entity, and they are highly likely not to go into liquidity in the future. They are tax exempt, and that to a certain level compensate the low returns for the investors. And finally, they allow longer maturities, which to a certain level fits with how certain funds who are investing in bonds, such as insurance and pension funds, would like to buy those instruments and leave them in the drawer for 20, 25 years until they mature while receiving their interest over the years. From the issuer perspective, they allow larger borrowing that suits mega projects. They allow more tailored funding because you are setting the terms and conditions attached to each one of them. They are efficient because they are associated with a large amount of benchmark borrowing, which stands to around £250 million. They are allowing stability, unlike lender options, borrower options, where it's subject to review every 5 years. And finally, they allow a very specific feature, which is delayed repayment, where you don't have to pay interest and installments right away after you take the debt. You can pause it for 3-4 years until the project starts to generate some income. The barriers that the literature suggests are defined in 5. The first one is the cost, because issuing a bond is a complicated process that entails having solicitors and market makers. There are uncertainty because there is a certain time frame, which is normally 6-month time, whether you're going to get the price that you were promised with, or whether there will be a certain demand on your bonds. Again comes the creditworthiness and the credit rating, that it's subject to credit rating agencies granting local and subnational authorities. Transparency, engaging with the financial markets, require quite a lot of disclosure on time and in terms of quality, how frequent it's going to be, and whether local authorities can meet such standards. And finally, due to the previous point where the buyers of such bonds are large pension funds, they tend to buy it and leave it with them until it matures. So the secondary market has very little liquidity, which means that there is little information to compare the instruments against each other and whether to understand how much the value of them at a certain point of time after the issuance. My research aim was to understand whether green, social, and other thematic bonds can assist local authorities to overcome certain barriers, and what's the impact of thematic bonds on such barriers in the market. The methods are used the historical institutionalism theory, whereby there was an explanatory descriptive questions such as where do they work, how do they work, and what context they work better in. A case study that is England compared to Sweden, because they share a couple of characteristics. And I used qualitative methods that applies semi-structured interviews with a wide range of stakeholders, such as local authorities, credit rating agencies, and market makers. And finally, try to analyze and finalize the details to generalize the outcomes. The findings of my research suggested that aggregators, such as the UK Municipal Bond Agency, will help in overcoming 4 or 5 of the barriers, but that's not available in every certain country. Market makers, such as banks, they will help in overcoming certainty, transparency, and liquidity. Nonetheless, issuing green and thematic bonds and with social output bonds would allow local authorities to overcome credit rating because it's perceived positively and will enhance the level of credit rating. It would allow a higher level of certainty due to the high demand in the market from buyers to widen their portfolio and include more social and green investments in their portfolio. And due to the high demand, they're expected that the cost will be brought down, making them more efficient. And finally, being in the green and social environment, demands issuers to be more transparent, to show the movement of the funds, which pressurize local authorities to be more transparent and issue more reports accordingly. The policy takeaways from my research is that municipal bonds are another tool in the toolbox for local authorities, where it enables them to disconnect from what is not certain, the funds from central and other governments, and provide them with access to the financial markets. Financial markets, when bonds are the topic, require either a strong market makers base or the availability of an aggregator who can pool different issuances at the same time. Nonetheless, social, green, and thematic bonds allow issuers to overcome at least 4 out of 5 barriers, and they pose more risk associated with secondary market liquidity due to the fact that those who buy them see them as preferable investment, and therefore they are unlikely to release them in the market again. But at the same time, 4 out of the 5 barriers would be overcome using green and social bonds. It was a challenge fitting all the PhD in 7 minutes, but hopefully that resonates with you. Thank you so much, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, Rami. Any question from the audience? Anna, yes. You're great, Anna.
Microphone with me. No, it's again more of a comment or a question. A comment. The question is: have you ever thought of linking a little bit your research and seen a little bit towards when you link it to the policy, also look at the financial instruments approach of the policy and whether it fits with that? Because indeed the financial instruments approach as proposed by the policy goes in the direction of what you were describing with the municipal bonds, and especially in this current period where even though of course the core business model of the policy is grants, a business in my parallel universe as working at the Commission, not business in your reality. It's to actually push further member states and the regions to go towards this type of, like alternative financial instruments solutions, and be less dependent on grants, like further develop the capacity, and especially at the local municipal level, to be able to build that capacity. So that's a question, a comment, and also a suggestion for further research.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. Sally.
Thank you. Great summary in 7 minutes. I think the elephant in the room might be what has just happened, particularly in the UK with the mini budget, when the very safe bonds became very risky. And I would just love you to comment on any damage that you think that has done to future bond issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Maybe a comment from my side. It's about the issue of replicability of the UK example in other continental, I would say, European economies, not in particular with regard to municipalities, but with regard to the sophistication of the financial system, of the banking system, and therefore, well, this is a suggestion or even a question. If you have thought about more sophisticated financial instruments or bonds that are not related to one single municipality, but for example, to a basket of projects included in cohesion policy operational programs, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how much time I have to respond to the questions, but
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Okay. Yeah. So certainly, Anna, your comment is something that I thought of, and it was part of my dissertation working on how engagement of local authorities within the financial market will be seen as an impact of financialization, and whether they are neglecting their social role by engaging with the financial market and maybe being more driven by profit making to satisfy credit rating agencies. But at the end of the day, grants are not guaranteed and they are reduced over time, and therefore they have to go there, like maybe what happened with the housing associations, again in England and across Europe. So it's a path that seems to be coming anyway, so they have to address the capability of engagement with the financial markets. And on the comment of the mini budget, you had to bring it, and it's something that caused a lot of damage, not only for the sub-sovereign bond market, but as well on the sovereign one. But I think it's a trend where if the UK government borrowing costs would go up, then certainly sub-national government borrowing costs will go up, because in reality, none of the sub-sovereign entities will be granted a better credit rating than the UK government, because it's seen as riskier and they are dependent on the UK support. So I think the damage is going to take a couple of years to recover from what happened in the said mini budget, albeit it's nothing near being mini budget. And on the comment of maybe trying to think about a wider framework that's applicable maybe to the EU. The framework that I've done compares England to Sweden, and it's kind of allows generalizability to a certain level, but maybe hasn't been linked to certain infrastructure projects. But maybe that's the next step for my research. But that's a good idea. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Rami Shamsin. So now I pass the floor directly to Ruggero Cefalo, who will talk about labor market integration in the EU regions, and it's a co-authored piece with two of his colleagues. Please, Ruggero.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for having me. So in my presentation, I will present some results of a research period that circled around this topic, so this youth labor market integration topic. And I will motivate why it is relevant, crucial to look at youth labor market integration when talking about cohesion. I will show you some results from our research and try to reflect on some policy implications in 7 minutes. So when we talk about youth labor market integration, we are talking about this period of transition between education and work and employment. And we like to depict it with this picture, so with this image of a sort of a labyrinth where there are risks and opportunities waiting for young people and not predefined trajectories. Now, is a crucial social issue, while we know that, for instance, youth unemployment is very cyclical, so it's very sensitive to the economic cycle. Young people are strongly affected by economic downturns due to last in, first out effects. We also know that difficulties during the school-to-work transition can have long-lasting scarring effects, and therefore can impact the risk of social exclusion, labor market insertion, also later in life, and therefore having even an impact in terms of political discontent and cohesion. However, in research on school-to-work transition, we noticed that the major of research is actually at the national level. The main idea is to compare countries or groups, clusters, regimes of countries. Therefore, here are the research questions that were guiding our activity, our research projects. First of all, we try to understand, okay, does the regional scale matter when looking at youth labor market integration? Do we find some substantial subnational variation? And what can we say in terms of drivers, so factors that have an effect on this variation and how to explain this variation? In the presentation, I will just be quick, look and give some descriptive evidence mostly and some zoom in on socioeconomic drivers. So in order to answer the question, we constructed a composite indicator of youth labor market integration, the ILMI index. We used a limited number of indicators because we wanted the index to be easy in terms of interpretation. And as you can see, it goes from 1 to 10, lower values mean low integration, so higher level of unemployment, NEET rates, low employment with respect to medium and high qualification, slower and difficult transitions. High integration, instead, is signified by low unemployment and NEET rates, higher employment, and faster and smooth transitions. Now, we mapped out the index across the timeline of 2004 to 2018. These are the average values at NUTS2 level. And as you can see, we find a mix of country and intra-country variations. So there is a group of regions and countries that tend to perform better in Central and Northern Europe especially. And then we have also groups of regions, especially for Southern Europe, where the index scores are actually low. We can also look at what happened across time. So what happens in terms of changes in the index and in the integration of young people in the labor market between 2005 and 2018. And we will see that regions from the Southern Europe saw their condition worsening, while several regions from the Eastern Europe saw the index actually improving due to a combination of factors that relate, for example, to entrance in the European Union and migration flows. Now a quick zoom in into the drivers of the index values. And here, these are the coefficients from the regression analysis. We can find, and this is, in our opinion, interesting, a positive effect of the demand of work, of the status of the conditions of the labor market, also in terms of knowledge-intensive demand of work, and an inconsistent or slightly negative effect of educational qualifications, with some indications that here we are looking into groups of regions, so there is some inconsistency. Does that mean that education doesn't matter in terms of youth labor market integration at regional level? Well, no, and this is not our interpretation. However, it's not only about educational investment, it's not only about the number of qualifications that are created. In our opinion, there is a need to look more into specific policies and institutional arrangements at regional and national and European level. So just some quick policy implications to close. What do the results show? Well, the descriptive analysis show the signs of an unequal geography of opportunities. There is a subnational variation below the country level that runs the risk of fueling or having an impact on social exclusion and political discontent. We're talking about young people, so we're also talking about the future of the European Union, and we have to project also our view into the future. In our opinion, we need a place-sensitive approach, which is, I understand, quite easy to say in a cohesion policy conference, in order to address this variation and to avoid context-blind and one-size-fits-all policies. The point is, there is no easy fix, in our opinion. And the idea is to try to find a balance between territorial sensitivity and the coordinating instances at higher level. In our paper, we talk about the necessity of a regulatory frame that provides criteria and resources in order to foster equal opportunities for youth in diverse territories and regions. And this is the idea that is quite strongly used also in multi-level governance, the idea of calibrated positive subsidiarity. So the idea of this balance between the territorial sensitivity, the sensitivity with respect to the variation at territorial level, and the regulatory frame of standards and resources. Now, I understand I put quite a lot and I ran quite a lot, so in case you want to get into the research, these are the papers that I was talking about in terms of research results. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you very much, Ruggero, for your fascinating presentation and for keeping to time like your previous colleagues. Again, I'm sure there are comments from the floor, so shall I just pass the floor directly to the one? Seriously, Anna? No? Some other comments? No comments, there must be some. Yes, please.
Thank you. Thomas Schaap from Bertelsmann Stiftung. Great presentation, looks like great papers, plural. Just a minor comment on the effect of education. Did you also consider non-tertiary education? And if so, is the effect different, especially when we are talking about rural region, where maybe tertiary education is not the most important education?
Are there any other? Yes. Good.
Thank
and
you.
then Laura.
But very, very short. So this is more related to the skills part, yeah, because there is going to be a lot of money that is going to be channeled in the skills part of the policy, and then the support of that through the different funds. And is there in the research that you're doing, do you have a specific angle when you're looking at that part of that specific part of how to treat it in the, you know, like in the social education conditions for further investments and for further integration of youth into the labor market?
Just it's a comment that links to the previous one, was about like what you told about the puzzling result of the tertiary educated. Sometimes even in growth regressions, the tertiary educated don't come up a sensitive factor into growth. So it's something it's an issue. What type of tertiary education did you get? Because everything is in a bundle, can be like something that it's prone to spur growth or not, or it's like spendable on the labor market. So maybe even by using like the amount of, so those who have a secondary education, which can be a vocational one, can maybe better explain the passage to the labor market. And in some system you can see, I mean, I know that the German case is the one where you have like a transition between the higher education, the labor market. It's very like, it's notoriously well functioning. So maybe that could explain why you have these results for the German, where they seem to be. And also, when I was previously working on employment data, I remember they always talk about looking at unemployment rate, but also unemployment ratio sometimes for youth, because that can reflect the different labor market structure for youth, where in some countries, like the Nordic countries, they tend to apply to be like active, because of all the, while in some other countries they are not active. So when you, in the denominator, you have the active labor market, you try to inflate in some cases, like I think for the Swedish country, at a certain point the youth unemployment rate was exploding just because they're active, while in other Mediterranean countries they tend not to be active, they have youth. But I don't know if you have like time series for that, I remember.
Thank you, Laura. I'll add one comment. I was wondering whether you considered out-migration as well. So when I was looking at the figures for the south of Italy, it's clear that a lot of youth actually migrate out of their regions to study sometimes, but certainly to work when they're highly qualified. And of course that, makes the performance of those regions worse. So I just wanted to know if you considered that. So 1 minute to reflect on all these points.
Okay, I will try. So, thanks a lot for the comments, which are very interesting. I will try to give an answer to the indicator choice. We looked into tertiary education, so share of tertiary educated on the total of the population for age 30-34 or for, I think, 25-64. So we did not look into upper secondary education because in that paper we were testing skill biotechnological change, and so we really wanted to look at a higher level of qualifications. However, we plan to look more into the different levels because some of the results also suggest that there are groups of regions and groups of regions that in which education at different levels have different effects on the integration of young people in the labor market. So this is something, let's say, to come. We use the youth unemployment ratio in building the index exactly because of what you said, because we try to eliminate the distortion with respect to institutional differences in the education system and therefore inactivity rates. Oh, absolutely. It's actually a very pertinent observation. In terms of migration, we test some variables and some indicators, but we didn't find significant results. It's probably a compensation effect, in our opinion. So in some situations, you have, for example, migration towards other countries and other regions, and this has the effect of lowering the competition for jobs in the regions, and therefore, in a way, the index gets a bit better. This is what we see, for instance, in some eastern regions, to a lesser extent, actually, in Italy. We will have to get a bit more into the analysis of these dynamics. One way to do this, in my opinion, maybe because of my background of institutionalist and policy analysis, is exactly to go from quantitative analysis into more fine-grained institutional analysis of skill formation systems or skill formation ecosystems below the national level, because that kind of analysis is, of course, has a lesser comparative range, but it has the potential to go into the mechanism, the circularity of the actors that are involved, and therefore getting some more in-depth information. We published a paper on this, but it is in Italian, and it was on a comparison between Italy and Austria. I didn't include it here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Now we move to the final presentation of this session from Milad Abbasi-Harofte about greening EU regions. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I would like to thank you for staying here till the last presentation. So during the multiple talks today, we heard about the importance of the green transition for in the context of the cohesion policy. So today I'm going to talk about this specific aspect of a specific aspect of the cohesion policy, if you will. So this is the result of my postdoc project at the Utrecht University with my two former colleagues, Carolina Castaldi and Sergio Petralli. So just to motivate my talk, I would say we can see green specialization as a window of opportunity for lagging and, as some colleagues already talked about, development trap regions. Of course, when we talk about specialization, we can talk about technological specialization. We can also talk about specialization in product and services or production application sites. But what we see in practice, most studies in economic geography, regional studies, literature focus on the technological side. Maybe the reason is it's more straightforward to work with patent data, inventions, and we don't have that much data on the application side. To remedy this situation, we used and utilized the trademark filing in Europe. And well, as a side note, it's relatively easy to identify green inventions, but it's not that easy to find green trademarks, basically green products and services in the market. So we use machine learning techniques to identify those trademarks based on their descriptors of goods and services. Okay. So having this sort of data, patent data and trademark data, we are able to map European regions on this quadrant. So basically, this is one snapshot in 2015, and you can see we can identify regions that are doing very well in terms of introducing technological solution, green technological solution. Also, we can see regions that diffuse or introduce green products and services in the market. And the regions that are good at both sides would be green tech and market leaders, as we identified here. So since we have data from early 2000s up to 2020, we can also categorize regions over time. And this is very interesting. I think, as you might expect, this is a very path-dependent phenomenon. So if your region is in the follower category, it's very likely that the region remains in this category. And we can actually estimate that numerically it's about 90%, the probability is about 90% that region remains in this category. So I think in the context of cohesion policy, it would be very interesting to ask, okay, what factor would help regions? So how policymakers could help the region to basically make this transition from the follower category to one of these other three categories. So to answer this question, we need to answer maybe another question, which is what technologies policymakers should target should promote in order to see these technologies, these promoted technologies leading to greener products and services. And we do not have a systematic way of tracking technologies in the market. So as I started my postdoc position about 2 years ago in Utrecht, Carolina, Sergio, and I thought about this problem and we tried to solve this. So I would like to skip the whole technical part. I would be happy to discuss this after the session. We use machine learning techniques to, and used millions of patents, titles, and abstract, and also about 2 million trademark filings, descriptors, to identify a statistically significant relation between technological and goods and service classes. So you can see one example based on the key terms. You can see we could find some relations that technologies might contribute to a specific kind of product and service. Okay, so with that, I would like to say we can do the same for digitalization. So here I talk about green capabilities, but the same can be done for digitalization or AI capabilities, and that would enable us for the first time to create the European Observatory on the joint green and digital transition, or the so-called twin transition. So this has at least two advantages in my view. First, researchers and policymakers can identify and target those technologies that contribute to AI or green products and services. And the second advantage, I guess, is that we can assess policies. So assume there's a policy in 2022, and in 5 years we can again map this region portfolio and see whether the policy helped region to basically depart from its previous goods and services trajectory, basically. Okay, so this is my last slide. I would like to end with further information if you are interested. So the project is finished, but you can read about the final report on the webpage of the European Patent Office, or the funder of the project. And if you are busy, you can listen to the podcast about the same project. And hopefully soon the data will be available. So I hope, yeah, I can go back. So the data based on what I showed will be available soon. So we are going to upload it on an open access repository, so all policymakers and researchers can use the data. And the method, also the script will be also shared, so you can do that in multiple times, multiple snapshots in time, so you can create your own concordance based on how market and technologies would evolve over time. With that, I would like to thank you, and I would be happy to hear your comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any comment or question from the audience, or from Anna, maybe?
I'm not trying to monopolize, so if there are other people, please. For me, one of the main questions, and I guess that I will have to go to the podcast or to go more into details, but I would say that maybe just here very quickly is the research. Have you found examples, and which, if you can give one or two examples of peripheral regions that did manage to specialize, this what you call niche specializations. So that would be very interesting, because this is one of the core questions of how we are going, to formulate the policy, and especially to concentrate on not just the challenges of peripheral regions, but also how they turn these challenges into opportunities, because that's, again, bottom line question, how to pass from being, peripheral region with structural and newly emerging challenges, how to pass to that to a, successful niche of specialization and development. Yeah. So so if you have a couple of examples, I think that would be, put more flesh to the bones when it comes to the presentation and the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna. Any other comment, question from the audience? No? Actually, Anna, you have stolen my thunder in the sense that I actually I actually would have liked to put the same kind of question about leapfrogging. So whether you, I mean, this issue of in this broader topic of territorial twin transition or territorial green transition, you have bumped into examples of regions that have managed or are, in your view, on the right track to leapfrog the innovation curve, or whether this is something to be further investigated indeed.
Okay, thank you very much for your question. So yeah, exactly. So we are working on a paper basically on this idea. So you might have heard about, entry and exit model that is commonly used in the related diversification literature. So we are using this to see, okay, what can explain basically entering or exiting from one category, especially follower category. Just to give you an example, it's very uncommon to jump from follower category to market and technology leader. So there's one very strange case of Vienna, which is not a peripheral region, but we see this region jumps from follower category to the best category, let's call it, and jump back. So we need to, explore what's going on there, but it's not a common behavior. So like few regions do that. But what is more common is like moving from follower category to one of let's say transitionary phase before the market and technology leader. And I do not have a perfect example of this, but we are going to investigate that more systematically with this model to see, okay, what explains this. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so thank you very much. We are at the end of this session. We are just a little bit over time. So before passing the floor to Laura for the final, and then to Sally for the final remarks, I would like to thank you all. You have been amazing in respecting your time assignments, in going to the point, in putting in sharing new avenues, and this is exactly what we meant with this session. I would like to thank the audience. We so lively despite the late hour, and just a last word to all of you. Well, if you have time, just surf the web and check out our JLC vacancies website. You never know. Thank you, and Laura, please.
Well, I don't have any more things to add, except that I also would like to restate how great you have all been, and thanks the audience as well. And I also wanted to add that these, 6 presentations that we saw today are just a small portion of all the proposals that were received. So in a sense, it's no wonder that you were so good with keeping to time and putting the messages across, because you were the result of a very tough selection process, and it was a good selection process. So thank you, Anna, for organizing this panel. And the colleagues in the RSA, of course. So I'll pass on before clapping and thanking the speakers, I'll pass the floor to Sally.
Thank you. I would like to thank you all as well. I'd like to say to you that there were 20 people watching us all online. I kept an eye on the questions, so we were okay with that, but 20 people watching us online. I have a ton of photos. If you would like them, you need to give your mobile number to Lisa during the dinner, and then we'll do a WhatsApp group of all of you and we'll pass all the photos on. And then I think Laura wants a final word, and then I think we might be done.
I want to add to what Alessandro said. It's fun to work at the JRC after moving out from the university in terms of labor market transitions. I've done it. And then I moved to the Commission. I moved to the G region. JRC is the Commission. And then I moved back to the core. I moved to the core.
You moved to Brussels. That's
But it's fun. Eh?
Well, thank you very much.
okay, thank you. Thank you all.